Hi everyone, and welcome to Big Coffee Fashion. Today with us we have Cressy Wesley, who is the co-founder of Halvis and Cressy. So welcome and thank you for participating.
Thanks, Martina.
Could you shortly present yourself and your company? What's the reason behind your business?
So Elvis and Cressy started in 2005, and when we started, we had a very, very narrow focus. We found out that London's damaged, decommissioned fire hoses were going to landfill, and we didn't want them to go to landfill anymore. So we thought, what can we do to save them? And we started a research project looking into everything about what the hose was made of, where it was made, how it was made, what its heating point, melting point. We did an enormous amount of research and discovered that if we were going to give it the best possible second life, that was to turn it into luxury goods. So we essentially do three things. We rescue materials that would otherwise go to landfill, we transform them into beautiful things, and then we donate 50% of the profits to charity. In the case of the fire hose range, we donate to the firefighters charity.
You turned a problem, let's say, in a new opportunity. So what's the real vision and mission of your business? Is it really to create value out of waste, or what would you be the core focus?
The core focus in the beginning was just to rescue fire hose. It was very simple. But as the company grew and, we started 16, 17 years ago, the mission also grows. We're responsible now for 15 different materials. We spend, a lot of our time doing R&D and working on completely new waste streams or completely novel approaches to those wastes. So I would say that the mission has grown considerably. Now it's to change the luxury industry. Now it's to change capitalism. It isn't just about adding value to waste material. It's a questioning why the luxury industry has failed virtually forever to treat people with respect and treat the planet with respect. It's to question traditional capitalistic business models that are extractive and exploitative and that don't give back. Is to be responsible for not just, there's a lot of companies with net zero aims. We've signed up to that. But for us, it's much more important to be net regenerative. Actually, as a point of our business, have a positive impact on the world rather than a negative. And that's not so easy. But it is something that have been working towards, and I think have been doing it with, style and flair and excitement, because a lot of people have associated in the past doing green things with doing less, and actually, or even with poor quality. And we've always fought against that a company shouldn't do less, companies should have a positive impact, and then they should do more. We don't think that green products should be of a lower quality. I think they should be better.
I think it's really, I love what you said. It's really about rethinking the way you are producing clothes, accessories, to create more values than the value you use to create these products. And that's really a lot about what B Corp is about, being a regenerative business. So you already answered somehow my first question. Why have you decided to become a B Corp, and when and how are you, let's say, this B Corp process is helping you to achieve your purpose?
Yeah, I think, obviously we started in 2005. I don't think the B Corp movement had started then. So we were kind of before the movement. And when B Corp was launching in the UK, they approached a bunch of businesses. We were one of them. So we were one of the founding B Corps in the UK. And I think they wanted us to join because certainly we represent very well the direction of travel is for businesses who are on that B Corp spectrum, and I think our business model is also quite easy to explain. So a lot of social enterprises have very complicated business models, and ours is very simple. We rescue, we transform, we donate. So there's a physical, tangible good. There's measurable impact in kilos. We can weigh the weight. There's measurable impact in donation dollars. We can count for that. So I think we're a very communicable business model, and that certainly helps the B Corp mission to grow. I think what's interesting about the movement now is that when I think they started with about 10, 15 B Corps in the UK, and now I think there's 600. And what's interesting about it now is that it's very aspirational for businesses to be B Corps. When we started, no one had heard of it. So now it's something that people actively want to be because they think it will separate them from their competition. It's something that businesses who aren't from a traditional impact background are trying to get to grips with. How do we adjust our business in order to survive the impact assessment? How do we transform ourselves into a business that's also on this journey of doing more and doing better every year? So I think that's what's really interesting, is that the movement can now attract businesses who certainly would never have thought of themselves in the impact or purpose space, who need to transition, continue. And if they don't transition, and if we never allow businesses to transition, then we don't have much hope of a civilization in the future.
Yeah, that's definitely the point. We don't have that much hope. And what do you think is the biggest challenge you are facing, but also that these companies may face as well in this transition towards a different business model?
I mean, to me, there's only two challenges, and that's climate change and biodiversity loss. That's it. Those are the two big crises that we are facing as businesses, as citizens, as countries, as a civilization. And if we aren't all engaged in solutions on both of those fronts, then we're wasting our time, and we're wasting our talent, and we're wasting our capital, and we're wasting our energy. So I feel those challenges within our business. And our response to those two crises has been to relocate our business to a farm, to launch a regenerative agriculture project, to plant 3,000 trees. I've got very muddy knees, so I was literally
it's quite tough.
I was literally planting trees this morning, and now planting trees this afternoon, because we have to get 3,000 into the ground and they start germinating again. And we moved our business here so that we could treat our own sewage, so that we could produce our own energy, so that we could sequester carbon into the soil, so that we could, basically bring wildlife back to a place where there was no wildlife. We had no earthworms on this farm when we came. We had 3% microorganisms in the soil. We had no dung beetles. Now we've got every hole we dig for a tree, there's an earthworm there. Every single hole, there's been an earthworm. It's just amazing what can be done in actually a relatively short period of time. We moved here we bought the farm in December 2020. So we've only owned it for just over a year now. And we were only able to move here in April. So I think it's been really incredible what we've been able to achieve so far. And I think that's a lot of people have questioned why a handbag company is moving to a farm and getting involved in agriculture. And I don't even think that's remotely confusing. I'm not going to leave the most important work that needs to be done to other people. I'm not going to leave it to future generations. I'm not going to leave it to other businesses. We all need to be engaged in this. And if that means that I'm going to have dirty fingernails for the rest of my life, it means I'm going to have dirty fingernails for the rest of my life.
But I mean, the question comes natural. How can you manage to be a fashion brand, a fashion luxury brands, and at the same time a farmer? It seems to be, the opposite side of the supply chain. How can you really get everything together? And how do you think that being one can support the other side? So how regenerative agriculture also can support the brand, and the brand can support and work together with this concept of regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the questions for other companies is, how can you not be doing this? If you're in the fashion space, you're in the raw materials business. Where do raw materials come from? Where does your cotton come from? Where does your linen come from? Where does your, where do your textiles come from? And maybe you are using synthetic materials. That's very possible. But how do you know what the impact of those synthetic materials are on the landscape if you are not yourself in the landscape? It's the same for food businesses. How do you understand if you're selling jam, if you don't know how difficult it is to grow fruit? How do you understand the systems in which we operate if you don't question the systemic issues that have caused climate change? And if you're not engaged in them at a very deep and meaningful level, it's going to be really hard for you to solve those problems. The best way to solve a problem is to really, really understand it in an intimate and direct. When we started with the fire hose, I brought fire hoses home. We were surrounded. We were eating, breathing, sleeping fire hose for months. And the way to understand ecosystems is to be in nature and to understand how delicate it is, how unbelievably complicated, complex it is, and to really appreciate that complexity and to see yourself within it. I think for too long we've had brands and companies that see themselves as apart from nature, people who see themselves as apart from nature. And that's actually the biggest issue we've got, is that human beings are organisms that should operate symbiotically within ecosystems instead of seeing themselves as somehow unique and above and more important ecosystems. And really being on a farm makes perfect sense to me. But we also have, the brand, and the brand feeds the farm, and the farm feeds the brand. So that's really fascinating. We couldn't take the risk of an agricultural project unless we had the capital that we've been saving in the business to reinvest in this agricultural project. A lot of the reasons why farmers are not choosing to go down the regenerative path is that actually it was really interesting. It was described to me in a very direct way by a viticulturalist who said that vines which have been grown on conventional agriculture, so with lots of fertilizers and pesticides and things like that, they're effectively drug addicts. They're addicted to the fertilizer. They're addicted to the cycle of chemicals. And if you just turn that chemical tap off, they wither and they die. They go into withdrawal. They really, really struggle with it. So it's not easy to transition, particularly if you don't have a separate business that can fund that transition. Whereas we're not transitioning. We bought land that needed to be saved, really needed to be saved, and we have the time and energy to invest in it. But it is like having two full-time jobs. I mean, 9 to 5, I work on Elvis and Cressy's traditional business, and then from 5 till 9, I work as a farmer. And that was easy in the summer when it was bright outside. It's a lot more difficult with a head torch on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right now, they just released a report from, I think, Vogue Business, and they mentioned that point. 90% of the emission of the fashion industry come from the supply chain. The supply chain alone cannot transit to a regenerative agriculture. So it's going to be also a major responsibility of the luxury industry and of fashion brands to really create the tool and the mechanism, or also to support economically their entire supply chain to transit for the better. But what is happening right now is that there is such a fragmentation in the supply chain that sometimes they don't even know who is the farmer behind the product they are buying, the material they are buying. So I really love the fact that you are really in contact with the nature. And I want to understand better, how do you use this industrial waste to create new products? Because it's not only about regenerative agriculture, so how you produce the material, but it's also really about a lot about how do you manage and handle this material to reduce the waste throughout the supply chain.
Yeah. So I guess, I find waste appalling. If you think back to our great grandparents, they probably just didn't produce any. We have mass consumption, and overconsumption is a product of the last few generations. It's not something that we engaged in as a species broadly before 1900s. We just started becoming more and more consumption based through that century and now, and particularly the last 20 years in fashion, it's just become insane. So for us, the idea of starting with waste as an input was just a way to turn the whole equation on its head. Instead of overproducing and producing our own waste, why not start with waste? And we found that there's just so much waste around that this isn't difficult. Everyone always wonders, well, how do you get a hold of these materials? What happens if there's no more fire hose? I'm not worried if there is no more fire hose, because there's still 40 million tons of material going to landfill in the UK every year. 40 million tons. That's an impossible amount to even conceptualize. So as long as you're innovative, there's plenty of free raw materials just lying around. And I'm not saying they should all be fashion, but they should certainly all find a home in construction and clothing and food systems. And there's no reason for us to produce at industrial composting, rebuilding the topsoil that we lose through traditional industrial agricultural practices. So for us, waste is the way in. How do we transform our waste? The big thing for us is that you have to get to know material. You have to love that material. You have to understand what it wants to do. So what is its heating point? What is its melting point? What is it like when it's cold? What can it survive? Is it waterproof? Is it, what does this material do best? And how can we take those best qualities and really make them shine? I objectively love fire hose. I just think it's great. I think it's a spectacular material. I would have stacks of decommissioned fire hose around as an installation, an art installation. But in order for us to have a viable business, I have to make fire hose lovable for everyone else. And that means craftsmanship. That means really good quality design. That means innovation. And that's largely what Elvis does in the business. So I go out and find materials, fall in love with materials, I bring them back, and then Elvis works out, I'll give some big picture ideas, but he works out the best way to bring those back to a market in the new form. People will understand and people will fall in love with it, because it's ultimately, the highlight of everything we do when we see other people cherishing these raw materials the way that we do. And I think we've been able to do that. Certainly we've been able to do that with fire hose, certainly with scrap leather, printing blanket, parachute silk, other redundant textiles, coffee sack, tea sack. We've been able to duplicate this business model again and again and again with different materials. And I suppose that's just because we do genuinely love, and we want to make sure that everyone else does too.
What is the biggest achievement you're proud of? I know you also been working a 5-year partnership with Burberry, but tell us, what is the achievement you're very proud of?
I think, when we started in 2005, we said, we are going to rescue all of London's hoses. That was the promise we made. And we had no idea whether we would ever be able to do that or not. That was a dream, and we thought we'll work towards it and we'll see where we get. By 2010, we were doing it. We could take all the hoses, rescue all the hoses every year. And I think that for me was a moment of incredible achievement for myself, for Elvis. At the time, there was no other team. There was just the two of us in the business. So we were doing all this, moving these 18 kilo hoses, one hose at a time. And then
you didn't have to go to the gym, let's say.
No, we really don't. And I think but for Elvis, we started also an apprenticeship program, and to see young people come into the business who may not have had the easiest this education ride, may not best background or the most supported home, to see them come into the business and really thrive and grow just because they're in a place where they're treated well and have the chance to learn new skills. That's pretty great too.
How do you think that in this journey, being B Corp has supported you in a roadmap for measuring your impact to improving it? And what would you have been differently thanks to what you have learned in this process?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the B Corp certification process is it's a discipline, right? So especially a business like mine was small. We were doing all this work anyway, but before the B Corp certified, a lot of it wasn't codified, wasn't written down. So this, to a certain extent, is really going to help with legacy planning of the business, because a lot of things that were just in our hearts are now on paper and easier to share, easier to communicate to a growing team. So that's good. But also doing the assessment shows you things that you may not have looked at. You know, we get low scores on governance because we don't have a board, we don't have advisors. Part of the reason we don't is because, you know, Elvis and I have a lot of mentors, a lot of people that we work with informally, but we can see the need in the future, especially if we're thinking about, you know, what's the real direction of the brand as it grows. That's something that we're going to need to do. So it does point out holes that you might need to fill. So I think that's been rather useful, but primarily I just love the community. I love meeting with other B Corp leaders who really are innovating, really are ahead of their time, really, you know, they're not talking about sustainability, they're delivering sustainability. I really enjoy that camaraderie. I love working with other B Corps and trading with other B Corps.
I think I'm gonna reuse this sentence. They are not talking about sustainability, they are doing sustainability, because that's totally true. Sustainability is like a buzzword right now, and you should not talk about it. You should just do it.
Yes.
It takes time.
Yeah, it does or it doesn't. You know, I actually don't think it does take time. I think it takes willpower. I think it takes people, you know, often we think it's really difficult for large companies to change. And I think, well, does it? If you're the CEO of a large company and your board doesn't want you to change and your shareholders don't want you to change, you should change. You should leave. Really do not have time for the old analogy of big companies are like super tankers and it takes them a long time to turn. We don't have a wide turning circle to give them anymore. Just because you're an energy company that drills for oil doesn't mean you always have to be that. You know, we started making belts. Now we're farmers. You don't have to, we're also making belts, but we're also farmers. You don't have to just do what your business does. And if your business is extractive and exploitative and overall damaging to the planet, then take the capital that you have, the human capital, the financial capital, the other assets that you have as a business, and do something different. It's not so radical, and it's kind of necessary in 2022 when we failed at COP to do anything slower.
That's really inspirational, and I think that the concept of being innovative is really strictly linked to the concept of transformation, and as you said, doing sustainability, because it's really about doing things differently from business as usual. And if you're not innovative and you do not have the right culture for being innovative and you do not get people engaged, so the concept also of likely-minded leaders in B Corp's community is really about that. It's trying to partnership for the goals and being stronger together. Otherwise, you get lost because, of course, smaller companies are not that have not that power if they try to do that alone.
Yes, although I think we're incredibly powerful as a company. You know, and the reason why we're powerful is that whenever anyone tries to argue with me like, oh, that can't be done. Like, well, we've been doing it for 16 years. It can be done, and it can be done by two people who have no experience in this industry. It's very powerful, I feel, to be in the position that we're in now, because no one can tell me that we live in some fantasy land and that we have a great idea that doesn't work in practice and that it needs too much money to transition. We had no money, we had no experience, we did it anyway. What are you waiting for? There is quite a lot of power in that.
There's definitely a call to action for all fashion companies that want to become not only B Corp, but want to try to change things. And why would you say the fashion company should become B Corp? If yes, and if not, why?
Well, okay, the big thing, there's two things. One, don't think of it as becoming B Corp. Think of it as revolutionizing how you work. And a byproduct of that is that you might pass the certification. The priority shouldn't be, we need to get this certification because it's cool. The priority should be, we need to radically transform how we work because we're running out of road, because how we work right now is inappropriate. It's unsustainable, it's exploitative, it's extractive. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's look through our dirty laundry and hang it all up in front of ourselves. So the thing is that people think this is like, oh, this is some terrible piece of work. Actually, this is an incredible opportunity. Fashion businesses are filled with creative people. So let them be creative. Show them the dirty laundry and say, hey, we don't want to have this anymore. We don't want to work like this anymore. Find out what these creative people are made of. Give them real challenges. Don't ask them to, oh, like we were doing skinny jeans for years. Let's do boot cut again. What a waste of people's people's creative energy, let them do something really wonderful. Let them attack the supply chain problems. Let them attack the material problems. Let them go wholeheartedly into repair schemes and take back schemes. So, these are joyful challenges, actually. These are filled with possibility and filled with the kinds of opportunities. Let's face it, young people entering the workforce, they don't want to, let's do tartan, let's do black, let's do skinny jeans, let's do boot cut jeans. That's boring. They want to save the world. So let them do it.
Let them do it.
Let's set people free and then see what happens. But yeah, I think do that work first, and you'll find doing that work will mean that you breeze through the assessment. But I don't think that the assessment, that the certification should be the goal. Radical transformation should be the goal. And the assessment is the cookie someone gives you when you're doing a good job.
I wanted to ask you 3 good practices you want to share, but almost you shared all of this because you mentioned be creative, be innovative, challenge the status quo. What else do you want to add as a best
look
practice?
At your dirty laundry.
Look at your dirty laundry, and we have all of
really
them.
Know it, and try to understand your problems that you create. What's your actual footprint? Some of your footprint might be amazing, might be great, and some of your footprint might be terrible.
Yeah,
and really assess, really get to grips with it, and then just take some joy in it. We know that this is climate change and biodiversity loss. These are keep you up at night, scary things. But when you're actively spending every day of your life on solutions, I can tell you that joy helps to stave off the fear. If you want to be able to sleep at night, the joy helps a lot.
And last question for you is 3 things you have learned to avoid, because it's always good to know what you have done very well, what's your best practices, but sometimes you need to stop and think, okay, I have learned to avoid and change that because that doesn't work anymore.
So we definitely have learned to avoid bad customers. So we did a project with Apple really early on. Apple pays its suppliers 9 months after it's sold your goods. So it's this ridiculously delayed consignment model, and they pay you the worst margins of any other retail partner in the business. And they were just incredibly stressful to deal with. So when they asked us to expand the range that we made for them, we declined because it was killing us and it was unethical. Their way of treating us was unethical, and our way of dealing with that, given the size of that company, was just to walk away. Things to avoid is customers that are going to kill you. Another thing to avoid is, getting in the idea that only you can do all of this work. Elvis and I worked so hard in the early phase of the business, and we constantly just adjusted and found new ways to do more work. And actually just bringing people who had skills that we didn't have to help us, was unbelievably liberating and incredible. And I wish we'd done it sooner. And I wish we would still do, understanding what skills that you don't have or what things you really don't like doing, and finding people who love doing those things and bringing them in to help is a good lesson. And I think that the third one is, I've said it before, you can't leave climate change and biodiversity loss to someone else. You can't.
Definitely you can. So the last question is really linked to that one. What changes would you like to see in fashion in the next years?
I would like companies to don't know how to do it. That they're just overproducing and their sustainable collections are like 2% of what they do. I would like them to just stop. I'd like them to throw in the towel and move on to something else and get out of a business that they clearly have no place being in, because they're not being creative, they're being destructive. So I'd like them to throw in the towel. And then those really amazing, innovative businesses that are ahead of their time, I would like them to fill some of that space. But we don't need to fill all of that space, because so much of what's produced is completely unnecessary. We don't need to produce the volume of clothing, the volume of accessories that we're producing. We need to make less. We need to last longer. We need to repair it. And at the end of its life, we need to be able to compost it or return it to use. So yes, I'm asking for a lot there.
Yes, for a lot.
I'm asking for either total net regenerative or you're out. You're not up for it. Throw in the towel. Just admit it now and stop destroying the planet and everybody else.
I want to leave like that because I really liked your inspirational closing sentence. And so thank you, Cressy. It was really a pleasure to have this chat with you.
No, it was lovely to work with you. Thanks.